This video is sponsored by Magic Spoon. So, before we dive into this one, I should clarify that I don't think Smile is the best horror film of 2022. I covered my pick Mad God a few weeks back. Heck, I don't even think it's the most interesting in terms of its core theme. If you really want to see trauma done horrifically well, just go watch What Josiah Saw and you'll witness the bleakest look at generational trauma through the lens of a dysfunctional Southern Gothic family. Need I say more? When I say Smile is the scariest film of 2022, of course, I speak purely for myself, and I hope you let me know your personal picks in the comments below, because God forbid we all emote in different ways. In fact, a better way to frame this video might be if you asked, who do I think is the one to watch horror filmmaker of 2022? To which I would say Parker Finn. His nightmarishly blunt execution of Smile strongly demonstrates his no-nonsense sincerity when it comes to presenting horror in the frighteningly fun form that made most of us fall in love with it in the first place. It contrasts immensely with my feelings towards Mad God, because while that animated grotesque apocalypse enamored my fascination towards the experimental and abstract, Smile doesn't get too bogged down in overbearing concepts and ideas, so that it can get right to the heart of what simply makes it scary. While yes, we will indulge in its overtly apparent theme of trauma, which everyone and their mother has covered by this point, it is important to note that Finn himself has made it clear that the metaphor should never override or interfere with the essential desire to make the audience shit themselves and cower in their seats. As we all know by this point, the topic of how complex and cryptic horror should be is a big, complicated discussion with varying nuances I'd prefer to save for the book deal I'm never going to get. However, the point is, echoing the same perspective made by IndieWire's Christian Zilko, for all the debates surrounding the vapid snobbery of elevated horror, allegory, symbolism, and metaphor can only go so far before they forget why people fundamentally enjoy horror stories. While I personally don't think Smile is perfect or even close to unique, my issues are largely negligible because it's no more guilty of falling into the same cliches, tropes, and conventions as every other horror movie out there. I mean, we even get the James Wan old school lantern because horror aesthetic. Bluntly speaking, the theme of trauma has become exhausting in horror films, and for me, it now takes quite a lot for a film to convince me it has anything interesting or new to say that hasn't been said already. When it comes to Smile, despite my grievances with certain aspects of the film, I will say it does take it in a harrowing direction. I'm surprised Paramount had the balls to let happen, but we'll obviously come to that in the spoiler section. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting on the video, and even following me on Twitter. And just before we dive deeper into the madness, here are a few words from this video's sponsor, Magic Spoon. So, I am notorious for skipping breakfast almost every day because when I wake up, I quickly get consumed with work. However, Magic Spoon came to me with the perfect solution: cereal. But not just any old boring cereal that makes me wish I'd rather be eating dust. Their one contains 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving, consisting of around just 140 calories, and yet magically retain all the beautifully fun and genuinely delicious flavors you remember eating as a kid whilst watching your Saturday morning cartoons. Now, on a specific personal note, obviously most of you will use milk in your cereal, but it's not something I do because that's just me. Yet, it actually works to my benefit as something to snack on throughout the morning as I'm writing or editing without distraction. Their variety pack contains 4 wholesome flavors: cocoa, fruity, frosted, and peanut butter, all of which taste exactly how my inner child remembers. While cocoa is my personal favorite for that sweet chocolate taste, my partner recommended mixing frosted and peanut butter because why not also relive my adventurous days? Magic Spoon cereal uses natural flavors, is keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and of course always tasteful, with a high protein intake, which I especially love as a cheeky post-gym snack. In fact, Magic Spoon is so confident in their product that it comes with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason, you'll get a refund on your money, no questions asked. So why not start off your new year right with Magic Spoon by clicking the link below or going to magicspoon.com/Hollinger to grab a variety pack of cereal and try it out today. Simply use the promo code Hollinger at checkout to get $5 off any order, and most of all, let me know what you think. Smile tells the story of Rose Cotter, a hospital psychiatrist who one day witnesses the suicide of a distressed patient called Laura after she warns Rose of a mysterious smiling figure that has been relentlessly stalking and threatening to kill her. After the traumatic event, Rose is encouraged to take a brief sabbatical to focus on her mental health, only to become terrorized by the very same shape-shifting smiling face that provoked Laura's horrific death, leading to Rose discovering a vicious cycle of suicides, all connected to each other. The film is a feature-length adaptation of Finn's short film Laura Hasn't Slept, which premiered at South by Southwest in 2020. I don't really have much to say about it other than it's a very well-crafted horror film that emphasizes performance, brooding visuals, and an all-encompassing sound design to build towards a diabolical but incredibly earned jump scare. It's more or less a significantly compressed version of Smile's climax and Laura's catalyzing death, with the short consisting of Laura detailing her fears of some obscure smiling entity to her therapist, only for the setting to unravel to show Laura is in fact in a nightmare. It's very much akin to how Freddy Krueger tormented and killed his victims in Nightmare on Elm Street, by drawing us into a warm, relaxed therapy room conditioned to ease tension, only to flip itself once our guard is down into this icy, inescapable fragment of memory. There's a prevailing presence carried in the Smile of making the real seem increasingly unreal, and how dire stress, anxiety, and sleep deprivation can warp our perception of the world in quite literal ways. It manages to feel oppressive and overwhelming without having to visually manipulate much, and that's because so much of the focus is placed on our empathy towards the character's devastating reactions. That's why the comparisons to J-horrors like The Ring and The Grudge stand out in particular, beyond simply how they both mastered the art of the parasitic cursed entity that's always there, even when you can't always see it. There's something inherently more horrifying about our attention to human reaction because, well, that's where we most see ourselves. These characters radiate genuine raw emotion that can't so easily be mimicked. Thinking about it, Smile doesn't really show you all that much. It reserves its most intense moments for when they really matter. Sosie Bacon, which is a great name by the way, really has to work hard to get across the desperation and sheer agonizing terror Rose experiences. It helped make certain scenes that didn't work for me better, such as when Rose's cat goes missing and turns up dead in her sister's son's birthday present murdered by Rose, which was just too predictably telegraphed to surprise me, but Bacon's reaction elevates it into a harrowing watch. By the way, remember this detail about the cat and Rose's sister's son because I have something to say about it later on. Another performance to really compound the impact was a character that's introduced later into the story who survived the curse, and his sudden burst of manic terror after learning Rose has the curse herself is so short but unforgettably bone-chilling. It's probably more frightened in my head than anything we eventually see, almost up there with Toni Collette from Hereditary, which I think speaks volumes for how human the film feels at times. Heck, when Rose first sees the entity just casually staring at her in the shadows in the form of Laura, I knew I was in for something clearly inspired by Hereditary. The thing is, before seeing Smile, my mind immediately gravitated to it being a pure gimmick made for teen horror schlock like Countdown or Wish Upon. In fact, I saw someone comment on it potentially being a movie made for meme culture, which is a perfect description for what I was expecting. The concern I typically have when watching feature-length adapted short films is that they stretch their concept too thin by trying way too hard to justify their story, which for me was the case in David Sandberg's Lights Out, adapted from a great conceptual short about a malevolent spirit that could only attack in darkness. However, Parker Finn proves there is actually something tangible to expand on from Laura Hasn't Slept. It shows restraint not to oversell its premise, delivering just enough mystery without giving you all the answers. The most common comparison I've seen is to It Follows, where a shape-shifting entity also stalks and kills the current holder of the curse as they try to find a way to stop it. Its concept speaks purely for itself. It doesn't need explaining because we come to understand it solely through Rose's perspective. We never leave her shoes, thus making for a grounded and intimate experience. It's ultimately most effective because it feels like an inconsequential situation. Rose, like Laura, is just one of the countless other people caught up in a curse that's origins are irrelevant to simply surviving and hopefully escaping whatever nightmare this is. Now, at this point, I want to get into later aspects of the plot, which will involve spoilers, obviously, and while I will be talking about the trauma stuff that everyone's been talking about, it's to get to the more interesting angle, and that is its depiction of the stigmatization towards mental illness. There are 2 points that stick out. I'll address the trauma stuff first because it's inherently part of the story, but the second one is Rose's relationship with the people around her. Literally the first image the film confronts us with is morbid bleakness. We see Rose's deceased mother following us, leaving young Rose severely traumatized. Years later, Rose is a therapist at the psychiatric ward of a local hospital, where she appears to have worked herself to the bone with constant shifts that we can assume to be a consequence of her trauma. On the one hand, she's avoiding her issues and drowning herself in distraction instead of actively confronting her demons, while on the other hand, it's later revealed she's burdened herself with the duty to help others because she feels guilt for being unable to save her own mother. Her heart is in the right place, but she's ultimately withering away from almost trying to appease her trauma as if it were a punishment, exacerbated further when we discover her mother was tragically still alive, begging for help, regretting her attempt, while Rose looked on in horror. It's a devastating revelation that's only further compounded when Rose's instinct for not helping her was because, well, she hated her mother for being cruel and hurtful. In Rose's words, her mother was a monster. As a result, oh my god, would you believe it, we once again have the monster as a metaphor trope, where the smile demon, or whatever you want to call it, is a subtext for Rose's guilt, trauma, and subsequent mental breakdown. This is further supported by how the entity actually transitions from victim to victim, where once it finally decides it's bored feeding off its victim's trauma, akin to Pennywise or Freddy Krueger, it possesses them into offing themselves in front of someone else, in turn traumatizing them, and the cycle continues. If I brush off my cynicism for exhausted themes, it's a fantastic and efficiently thought out concept that's elevated by how disturbing its delivery is. Rose seeks help from her ex-boyfriend Joel, who uses his resources as a detective to track down a list of victims, all connected via the same pattern of demise, leading Rose to meet with the widow of the victim who passed it on to Laura, eventually discovering one victim managed to survive by brutally murdering someone in front of a witness in order to pass it on to them. I'll come back to this at the end because I want to move into Rose's relationship with the people around her. Frankly speaking, the people closest to Rose in her life are absolutely unbearable, specifically her sister Jude and her husband, and Rose's fiancé Trevor. They can collectively be summarized as self-centered snobs who look down on Rose and show her little compassion, with any concern stemming from a need to take care of their feelings because they think Rose's behaviour brings them down. They are pieces of shit incapable of showing any ounce of self-awareness, only adding further isolation to Rose's life, giving her zero outlet or support in which to express her pain without judgment. They do nothing but stigmatize her for what she's going through. They frame her mental illness as scary to them, which I can understand the fear of not knowing how to deal with it because none of us are taught how to handle something like this, but their utter refusal to listen to her and instead distance themselves from her is the concern that stands out the most. They don't need to actually help her, just be there for her, but ultimately from her perspective they're not. Their concern comes from the wrong place, so Rose ends up bottling her trauma and stress more and more. The only support bubble she has is her boss Morgan, her former therapist Madeline, and her ex-boyfriend Joel, but where it gets interesting is how Rose responds to their genuine concern. She can't confide in her boss because while friends, she fears it it could impact her work despite Morgan's assurances, and with her therapist, she sees through her impartiality. Now, what do I mean by this impartiality? Well, there's no doubt her therapist is concerned, but in a cold transactional sense, there's an emotional detachment to the patient that inherently exists that Rose herself is aware of. This is echoed in the opening when Laura brings her concerns to Rose, but Rose responds with a detached effort to diagnose her instead of just listening to her, and when Rose then tries to bring her concerns to Madeline, the tables are turned and Rose lashes out at not being listened to. In fact, in all actuality, Madeline does the opposite to Rose. Rose comes in and attempts to diagnose herself, and Madeline tells her not to, and instead sincerely wishes to listen to her, but Rose just wants a scientific rationale for her behaviour. It doesn't end up going anywhere, but nonetheless, it's a fascinating dynamic on our relationship with therapists and what it is we truly seek from support bubbles where we can find them. Ultimately, the one that works best for her is Joel, who does exactly what Rose wants, just listens and actually follows her on her journey. We really need more people in the world like Joel and Madeline, because most of the other characters in the story treat the victims as if they're insane or delusional, boxing them into stigmatizing titles and dehumanizing them as a result. However, because they're the good people in Rose's life, it will come as no surprise that the entity uses them to get closer to Rose, leading to the harrowing payoff you're about to see. In the end, Rose decides to return to her childhood home after being unable to follow through with the sole survivor's advice of passing on the entity by brutally murdering someone in front of an unwilling victim. The goal is that, whatever happens, nobody will be around for the entity to be passed on, thus ending its lineage even if it results in Rose's death. However, the emotional goal is to confront the demon in the form of her mother, reflecting Madeline's words that wounds will never fully heal, but she can learn to control them, eventually standing up to whatever this entity thing is and destroying it once and for all. Another however, what we actually get is a false ending similar to Laura Hasn't Slept, in which Rose returns to Joel thinking it's all over, only for his apartment to transform back into her home, allowing the entity to overcome her while her guard is down, as it does every time throughout the story, turning into this grotesque abomination I don't think I can show because YouTube guidelines. The creature not only causes Rose to self-immolate, but does so after delaying her conscience long enough for fucking Joel to arrive to take on the curse. It's a divisive ending, sure, but I loved its daringness to do something that most mainstream horrors don't typically do. It goes full Kenneth Lonergan Manchester by the Sea, and hits you with the reality that sometimes you just don't overcome things like trauma. Now, in the wrong hands, it's an incredibly dangerous statement to make, but the attention isn't so much drawn to it as it does simply serve to give you a dramatically haunting mic drop. I will admit it does undermine the thesis of the film somewhat, because all this talk about overcoming it in an empowering way that doesn't involve victimizing others is proven futile, but I guess I am willing to look past it because, frankly, I've seen the overcoming outcome trope so many times before that this came as a genuine shock to me. Now, lastly, remember I asked you to keep Rose's sister's son in mind? Well, there's a point about him being left traumatized after finding the dead cat that unfortunately goes nowhere, but there is a point in here that summarizes the whole ordeal. So my partner and I thought the ending would be Rose dying without the entity transferring, but it would then just remanifest into the sun because at the end of it all, trauma isn't just some stoppable force. It's always going to exist in different shapes and sizes, molding and manifesting in different indescribable ways for each of us, and again, echoing the words of Madeline, it's ultimately something we have to learn to live with.